Welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. Here, we bring you chilling tales to keep you on edge while helping you unwind. If you enjoy our stories, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Got a creepy story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We might feature it in a future video. Now sit back, relax, and let the story begin. When I first started my new job, I was determined to make a good impression and blend in with the team. Josh was the first person to welcome me. He was friendly, charismatic, and seemed to know everyone in the office. On my first day, he offered to show me around, introduce me to the others, and even helped me set up my workspace. I was grateful. Starting a new job can be nerve-wracking, and having someone like Josh to guide me made everything feel less daunting. At first, his kindness felt genuine. He'd stop by my desk in the morning to say hi, crack a joke or two, and share tips about surviving office politics. Avoid the coffee in the break room on Mondays, he'd say. It's practically sludge. I laughed, appreciating his efforts to make me feel comfortable. But within a couple of weeks, things started to shift. It began subtly. Josh would ask questions that felt unusually specific. Did you go to that Italian place on Main Street last night? I thought I saw someone who looked just like you. Or, how's your roommate? Still working late hours? The first time he asked about my roommate, I dismissed it as small talk, but the second time, it struck me as odd. I had never mentioned my living situation to him, or anyone at work for that matter. Over time, his presence began to feel unavoidable. No matter where I went in the office, Josh was there. If I went to grab coffee, he'd appear moments later. If I stayed late to finish a project, he'd stop by my desk to see how I was doing. Once, he even showed up at my favorite lunch spot across the street. I love this place too, he exclaimed, pulling up a chair at my table. It felt like too much of a coincidence, but I brushed it off. Things escalated when he started making comments that suggested he knew more about my personal life than I'd ever shared. One morning, he complimented my jacket, saying, "That's the same one you wore last Friday, right?" I froze. I hadn't been at work the previous Friday, but I had worn the jacket when I ran errands around town. How could he possibly know that? One day during a team lunch, while everyone was sharing weekend plans, Josh casually mentioned a detail about my neighborhood. "I think I saw your car parked near the grocery store last night," he said with a grin. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone at work where I lived, and his comment felt like a violation. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Was it all in my head? Was Josh just overly friendly? Or was there something more to his behavior? I started paying closer attention to him. It felt like every time I turned around, he was watching me, standing just a little too close, or finding excuses to talk to me. The breaking point came on a Friday evening. I was working late to meet a deadline, and was one of the last people in the office. As I walked to the parking lot, I noticed someone standing near my car. My heart sank when I realized it was Josh. He was leaning against a lamppost, scrolling through his phone. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mixture of surprise and something I couldn't quite place. "Hey," he said casually. "Didn't expect to see you here this late." I forced a smile and mumbled something about finishing up work. My hands trembled as I unlocked my car and got inside. I didn't look back as I drove away, but the feeling of his eyes on me lingered long after I reached home. The next day, I decided to bring it up with HR. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, so I framed it as a concern about workplace boundaries. They listened, took notes, and assured me they'd handle it. While Josh never confronted me directly, he stopped hovering around me as much. The atmosphere felt less tense, but I couldn't shake the unease I felt every time I saw him. Even now, I'm not sure if Josh was just socially awkward, or if his behavior crossed a line into something more sinister. I stayed at that job for another year, but I made sure to keep my distance. It was a lesson I hadn't expected to learn. Sometimes, even the friendliest faces can make you feel anything but safe. When I first joined the marketing agency, I was warned about one thing above all else. Don't leave your lunch in the office fridge. At first, I thought it was just a running joke among coworkers, a light-hearted way to tease the new guy. But within my first week, I realized they weren't joking. It started innocently enough. One afternoon, I went to grab the sandwich I had packed that morning, chicken, avocado my favorite. I opened the fridge, and it was gone. I stood there for a moment, confused. Had I left it at home? Was it hidden behind the mountain of Tupperware that filled the shelves? After a few minutes of searching, I gave up and assumed I must have forgotten it. The next day, I packed another sandwich and made sure to place it in a brightly colored bag. By lunchtime, it was gone again. This time, I was sure. Someone had taken it. I started mentioning the issue to my co-workers, expecting them to laugh it off or admit to the prank. Instead, they nodded knowingly. "Oh yeah," one of them said. "That's the fridge bandit. Everyone's been hit at least once." "Fridge bandit?" I asked, half laughing. "Yeah, someone's been stealing food for months. It's always random. Sometimes it's leftovers, sometimes snacks. Nobody knows who it is." Apparently, HR had sent out a polite email about respecting shared spaces, but it didn't stop the thefts. Some people resorted to keeping their food at their desks or in insulated lunch bags, but I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I decided to catch the culprit. The next day, I packed a decoy lunch. Inside the bag, I put a sandwich smeared with an obscene amount of hot sauce. I'm talking ghost pepper level heat. If someone tried to eat it, they'd regret it. I placed the bag in the fridge and waited. By noon, the bag was gone. I scanned the office, looking for anyone who seemed uncomfortable or suspicious, but no one stood out. I started to wonder if the bandit had taken it home. Days passed and no one confessed. I gave up on the spicy trap and started bringing less appealing lunches, plain salads, unseasoned chicken. They were left untouched. I thought the problem was solved until one afternoon, I noticed something strange. I was working late, finishing up a project, when I saw her, Dana, one of the senior designers, hovering near the fridge. It was almost 7 p.m., and the office was nearly empty. I watched as she opened the fridge, pulled out a container that clearly didn't belong to her, and slipped it into her bag. I was stunned. Dana was one of the friendliest people in the office, always offering to help, bringing in donuts on Fridays. She didn't seem like the type to steal lunches. I didn't confront her that night, but the next day, I kept a closer eye on her. Sure enough, during lunch, she sat down with a meal that looked suspiciously like leftovers someone had mentioned earlier. I finally decided to say something. "Hey Dana," I said casually. "That looks delicious. Did you make it?" She froze for a moment, her fork halfway to her mouth, before forcing a smile. "Oh, yeah, just something I threw together." The awkwardness in her tone confirmed it. She was the bandit, but instead of calling her out, I let it go. I wasn't sure if she was struggling financially or just had a bad habit, but I didn't want to escalate things. Instead, I quietly told a few coworkers to label their food more clearly or keep it at their desks. After that, the thefts seemed to stop, at least for a while. Dana never admitted to anything, and I never told anyone outside of our team. Sometimes the workplace is a delicate balance, and calling someone out isn't always the best solution. Still, I couldn't look at those Friday donuts the same way again. When I started my job at a mid-sized tech company, I was thrilled. The team seemed friendly, the projects were interesting, and the office even had a great coffee machine. But nothing could have prepared me for Nora. Nora was in her early 30s with a bubbly personality and a laugh that echoed through the entire open office. At first, I thought she was nice, maybe a little too chatty, but harmless. She introduced herself on my first day and made sure I felt welcome, which I appreciated. But then it started. During my second week, she stopped by my desk unannounced. "How's it going, newbie?" she asked, leaning casually on the partition. Before I could answer, she launched into a story about her weekend. At first, I smiled and nodded, but then she got personal. "So, I went out with my ex last night," she began. "You remember I told you about Brad, right? The one who cheated on me with my cousin." I stared at her blankly. This was our second real conversation. There was no way I knew about Brad or her cousin. "Anyway," she continued, "we went to dinner and he started crying, like full-on sobbing, saying he wants me back. Can you believe that? After everything he did." I managed to mumble something polite, but Nora didn't seem to notice. She just kept going. By the time she left, I knew more about her love life than I did about some of my closest friends. This became a pattern. Every day, like clockwork, Nora would stop by to share some overly personal detail about her life. Her parents' divorce, her latest fight with her roommate, the strange rash she had on her arm. And she didn't just tell me. She told everyone. One day, during a team meeting, she casually mentioned that she'd found her roommate's secret stash of adult toys while cleaning the apartment. The room went silent, and our manager coughed awkwardly before steering the conversation back to project deadlines. It wasn't just the oversharing that made things uncomfortable. Nora had no boundaries. She'd read over your shoulder, borrow your pens without asking, and even scroll through her phone right in the middle of conversations. The breaking point for me came during a client presentation. I was nervous, but I'd prepared extensively. As I was about to start, Nora leaned over and whispered, "Don't mess up. This client's a big deal." Her comment threw me off completely. My voice shook, and I stumbled over my words. Afterward, she patted me on the back and said, "Don't worry. Everyone screws up sometimes." I decided I had to set some boundaries. The next time Nora stopped by my desk, I kept my responses short and avoided eye contact. When she lingered, I politely said I had a lot of work to do and turned back to my computer. It took a few weeks, but eventually she got the hint. She started sharing her stories with other coworkers instead, and I could focus on my job in peace. Still, every now and then, I'd catch snippets of her conversations floating across the office. Stories about disastrous dates, embarrassing moments, or oversharing on a whole new level. And while I didn't miss being her confidant, I couldn't help but wonder how she managed to have so much drama in her life. I've always believed that a little humor can make the workplace more enjoyable, but Kevin took it to another level. He wasn't just the office jokester. He was the self-proclaimed office prankster, and he wore that title with pride. At first, Kevin's pranks were harmless. He'd tape a picture of a cat over someone's profile photo on Slack, or replace the office coffee pods with decaf, and wait for people to complain. It was annoying, sure, but nothing too disruptive. I even laughed the first few times. But as time went on, Kevin's pranks became more elaborate and more intrusive. One morning, I walked into the office to find my computer monitor covered in plastic wrap. My chair was missing, replaced with one of those giant bouncy balls from the gym. A note taped to the ball read, "Time to work on your core strength." It wasn't just me. Kevin's antics spared no one. He once filled our manager's office with helium balloons, so when she opened the door, they all spilled out, floating everywhere. She didn't find it nearly as funny as he did. Another time, he printed out fake Employee of the Month certificates and posted them all over the break room, each one featuring ridiculous photoshopped pictures of various coworkers. The worst, though, was the day he decided to mess with the office thermostat. It was the middle of winter, and he somehow managed to override the system, setting the heat to 30 degrees Celsius, about 86 degrees Fahrenheit. By noon, everyone was sweating and miserable. When the building manager finally fixed it, Kevin was sitting at his desk with a fan and a popsicle, grinning like a child who'd just gotten away with stealing cookies. "Why do you do this?" I asked him one day, genuinely curious. He shrugged. "Work's boring if you don't spice it up." But the thing about Kevin's pranks was that they weren't always funny, at least not to the people on the receiving end. One Friday, he pulled a prank that crossed the line for everyone. He sent out an email from a fake account, pretending to be from HR, announcing that the company was implementing a policy requiring employees to work every other weekend. The subject line read, "Mandatory weekend work policy effective immediately." People freaked out. Half the office was whispering in corners, wondering if they'd have to cancel plans or find childcare. A few brave souls marched straight to the real HR office to complain. When Kevin finally revealed it was a joke, the mood in the office shifted. No one laughed. In fact, several coworkers confronted him, saying it was inappropriate and caused unnecessary stress. The following Monday, our manager called Kevin into her office. He was in there for over an hour. When he came out, he looked deflated, like a balloon someone had let the air out of. After that, Kevin toned it down. No more plastic wrap, no more fake HR emails. He even apologized to a few of us, though I could tell it wasn't easy for him. Still, every so often, I'd catch him grinning mischievously, like he was itching to pull one last big prank. And while the office felt calmer without his antics, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder every now and then, just in case. I've had my fair share of quirky coworkers, but Claire was in a league of her own. She was what you might call a perfectionist, but not in the usual organized and detail-oriented way. No, Claire's obsession with perfection went far beyond color-coded spreadsheets and alphabetized filing cabinets. I first noticed it during my second week on the job. I was putting together a presentation for a team meeting, and Claire hovered over my shoulder the entire time. Every slide I created was met with a critique. "Your font sizes aren't consistent," she said, pointing to the screen. "This is 12 point, and that one's 11.5. You can't have that." "Okay, I'll fix it," I said, trying to stay patient. And your color palette, she added. It's all wrong. These blues clash. You need something more cohesive. I ended up spending an extra 2 hours fixing things she called out, things no one else would have even noticed. At first, I thought Claire was just passionate about her work, but over time, I realized she wasn't just concerned with her own tasks. She had an opinion about everyone's work. She'd rearrange the items on your desk without asking because, in her words, this will help you focus better. She'd rewrite your emails before you sent them, claiming, your tone needs to be more professional. And God forbid you submit a report without running it past her first. She'd find errors you didn't even know existed and make you feel like an idiot for missing them. One time, I overheard her talking to a new hire, a guy named Ben. He'd just printed out a report and was walking to the copier when Claire stopped him. Ben, no offense, she said, in a tone that meant she was about to offend him, but your margins are off. You should really use 1.25 inches instead of 1 inch. It's more visually appealing. Ben looked confused. Okay. She took the report from his hands and walked off. I don't think Ben ever got it back. The tipping point came during a company-wide event. Our team was responsible for decorating the conference room. Claire immediately took charge, assigning everyone tasks and outlining her vision for the space. Everything needs to be symmetrical, she instructed. Balloons on both sides equal height. Tablecloths must be perfectly aligned with the table edges. And no clashing colors, please. We spent hours setting everything up according to her exact specifications. When we were finally done, the room looked amazing. But Claire wasn't satisfied. She walked around, nitpicking every little thing. This banner is slightly off-center. Move it 2 inches to the left, she said. And these flowers? They need to be rotated so the petals face the door. By the time the event started, we were all exhausted and annoyed. Claire, meanwhile, was basking in the glory of her perfect setup. After that, people started avoiding her. If she asked for help, they'd suddenly have urgent deadlines or back-to-back meetings. I didn't blame them. Working with Claire was like walking on eggshells. One tiny mistake, and you'd never hear the end of it. Eventually, management stepped in. Claire's attention to detail was valuable, but her constant micromanaging was driving people crazy. She was given a new role that kept her more focused on solo projects, and the rest of us breathed a collective sigh of relief. Still, I can't look at a PowerPoint slide or a set of balloons without hearing her voice in my head, pointing out all the flaws I didn't even know were there. Every workplace has its quirks, but ours had Linda, the unofficial office gossip. From the moment I joined the team, Linda made it her mission to fill me in on everyone's personal business. At first, I thought she was just being friendly, helping me get to know my new coworkers. But it quickly became clear that Linda's version of helpful was just intrusive and exhausting. On my first day, during a coffee break, Linda sidled up to me with a sly grin. "See that guy over there by the printer?" she whispered, nodding toward Steve, one of the IT guys. "He's been in 3 different departments in 2 years. Rumor is he can't get along with anyone." I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. But Linda wasn't done. "And Carol in accounting? She's dating someone in HR, totally against company policy. But, what HR doesn't know won't hurt them." From that day on, Linda made it her job to keep me updated. I'd be in the middle of an email, and she'd lean over my cubicle wall with some juicy tidbit. "Did you hear about Rachel's vacation?" she'd ask. "No," I'd reply, trying to sound uninterested. "Well," she said dramatically, "she told everyone she was going to Cancun, but I saw her Instagram. She was at a lake house. Makes you wonder what she's hiding." Linda's knack for eavesdropping was uncanny. She somehow managed to be everywhere at once. Listening in on meetings she wasn't even part of, standing just close enough to overhear phone calls, and lurking near the break room during private conversations. One afternoon, I accidentally became the subject of her gossip. I had called a plumber to fix a leaky faucet in my apartment, and Linda overheard the call. "Having home issues, huh?" she asked later, her tone dripping with faux sympathy. "It's just a small leak," I said, brushing it off. By the next day, half the office knew about my flooded department. "Sorry to hear about the water damage," my manager said during a meeting. "There's no damage," I replied, annoyed. "It's just a leaky faucet." But that didn't stop Linda. The story had already taken on a life of its own. Things escalated when Linda got her hands on the office birthday calendar. She started tracking people's ages, anniversaries, and even hinting at who might be expecting a baby based on their dietary choices at lunch. One coworker, Amy, stopped eating sushi for health reasons, and Linda immediately began speculating about a pregnancy. "She's probably in her first trimester," Linda told me conspiratorially. "No alcohol, no raw fish, it's obvious." Amy was furious when she found out. She wasn't pregnant, just allergic to seafood. The final straw came during a team-building retreat. We were asked to share one interesting fact about ourselves, and Linda immediately turned it into a game of guess their secret. When it was my turn, I shared a simple story about hiking. Linda piped up, "Didn't you mention once that you got lost on a hike? That must have been so scary." I hadn't, but it didn't matter. By the end of the day, the rumor had spread that I'd been rescued by a search and rescue team. After the retreat, management finally stepped in. Linda was given a warning about her behavior and told to focus on her work instead of everyone else's lives. She tried to rein it in, but the damage was done. People stopped sharing personal details around her, and her attempts to join conversations were met with awkward silence. Though Linda still works at the office, her gossiping days are mostly behind her. As for me, I've learned to keep my personal life as boring as possible, or at least make it seem that way. You never know when someone like Linda might be listening. When I got my job at a local gym, I was excited. I had always been passionate about fitness, and the idea of working in an environment where I could help others reach their goals felt like the perfect fit. The gym itself had a great vibe, and the staff was friendly. However, one colleague quickly stood out, Jason, the personal trainer. At first, Jason seemed professional and approachable. He was friendly and seemed genuinely interested in helping clients get the most out of their workouts. But after a few weeks, I started to notice something that made me uncomfortable. He had a habit of standing way too close during conversations and constantly placing his hand on people's shoulders or backs when talking to them, even if it wasn't necessary. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just being friendly, I thought. But as time went on, it became more obvious that this wasn't just a personality trait. It was something more intentional. I remember one day when I was helping a member with their weightlifting form. Jason walked over, even though he wasn't the one training the client, and began correcting their posture. He got so close that I could feel his breath on my neck. The client seemed uncomfortable too, but didn't say anything. Jason touched my arm lightly as he offered his advice, and I just stood there, unsure how to react. The next incident occurred a week later when I was in the break room, preparing a post-workout snack. Jason walked in and, without any warning, stood next to me and placed his hand on my lower back as we talked about the upcoming gym events. It wasn't just a brief touch, it lingered. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I tried to ignore the uncomfortable sensation. After that, I started to dread seeing him at work. I tried to avoid interactions with Jason as much as possible. If he came too close, I would subtly step back. I would pretend to be busy if I saw him approaching, hoping he'd take the hint. But, as he often did, he would try to engage me in conversation, making sure to stand too close for comfort, touching my arm or shoulder as he spoke. One day, I had had enough. I was showing a new member how to use a machine when Jason came over to help. I tried to remain professional, but when he placed his hand on my waist to adjust my stance, I couldn't hold back anymore. I gently but firmly stepped away. "Jason, I really need you to respect my personal space," I said, trying to sound as calm as possible. "I'm not comfortable with the physical contact." Jason looked at me, surprised. He backed away immediately, looking embarrassed. "Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable." From that moment on, he made an effort to keep his distance, but the damage had already been done. I started to avoid him whenever I could. I spoke to my manager about the situation, and she assured me that she would have a word with Jason. He was told to be more mindful of personal boundaries and not engage in any unnecessary physical contact with the staff or members. I'm not sure if Jason fully understood what was wrong with his behavior, but he started keeping his distance from me after that. The gym felt less stressful, and I was able to go about my day without constantly worrying about his proximity. It's crazy how a seemingly small thing can make you feel so uncomfortable. Working in a gym is supposed to be about helping people feel good, but that experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries and how crucial it is to respect others' personal space. After that, I learned to speak up when something felt off, and I started to feel more confident in enforcing my boundaries. If you don't speak up, others will never know that something is wrong. I had always heard about that one colleague, the one who could never be satisfied with anything. But I never thought I would end up working under someone like that. It was my first day working as an office assistant at a marketing firm, and I was eager to get started. The team seemed great, and I could already tell I'd be learning a lot. But then there was Jane. Jane was the office manager, and, at first, she seemed like the epitome of professionalism. Her desk was immaculate, her clothes always pressed, and she always had a smile on her face. But as I spent more time in the office, I began to notice how quickly that smile could fade when things didn't go exactly her way. On my second week, I was asked to handle a presentation that Jane had been preparing for a client meeting. She'd spent days organizing the slides and setting up the graphics, and she wanted everything to be perfect. The moment I took the presentation to her for approval, I knew something was wrong. "Why are there 2 spaces between these words?" she asked, pointing to the text in the slides. I blinked, unsure if she was serious. I think that's just the default spacing," I stammered. Jane didn't look amused. "I expect better attention to detail from my team. Fix it, and change this font." "I don't like it." I sat back down at my desk and quickly adjusted everything to her liking. But it wasn't the last time. Over the next couple of weeks, I was assigned a series of small tasks, each of which would be returned with comments like, "This isn't good enough," or "I thought I told you to make it perfect." No matter how hard I worked, nothing ever seemed to be quite right for Jane. Then came the day that really pushed me to my limit. I was in charge of scheduling a meeting for Jane and her client. I made sure to confirm everything twice, checked the room booking, and even ordered catering for the meeting. It was a simple task, but I was meticulous about it. On the day of the meeting, I received a frantic call from Jane about 10 minutes before the meeting was supposed to start. "Where is my coffee?" she demanded. "I told you I wanted it ready when I walked in." I was stunned. I had followed every instruction and thought I had done everything right. But this? It felt like I was being berated for a minor mistake. I apologized and immediately ran to the coffee shop down the street to get her order. When I returned, she was standing in the hallway, waiting for the client to arrive. "Don't let this happen again," she muttered, barely acknowledging me. Over the next few months, I became more and more frustrated. No matter what I did, nothing ever seemed to meet Jane's impossible standards. I could feel my confidence slipping. I started double-checking every single detail, overthinking everything I did just to make sure there wouldn't be another mistake. One afternoon, after a particularly harsh comment from Jane, I decided to confide in one of my coworkers, Emily. Emily had been with the company for a while, and I had noticed that she seemed to have a calmer demeanor when interacting with Jane. "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted to Emily. "Nothing I do seems to be enough for her. She's always criticizing everything." Emily nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, Jane can be tough. She's a perfectionist, and she's never happy unless things are exactly the way she wants them. It's not you, it's just how she is." It was a small comfort, knowing I wasn't the only one who felt this way. But Emily also gave me advice. "You have to set boundaries. Don't let her make you feel like you're not doing a good job when you are. If you need clarification, ask for it up front. Don't let her hold things over your head." I decided to take that advice. The next time Jane criticized my work, I stood my ground. "I understand that you want things to be perfect," I said calmly, "but I've double-checked everything. If you need something specific, let me know in advance so I can meet your expectations." To my surprise, Jane backed off. She seemed to appreciate the fact that I wasn't just accepting her constant criticism anymore. After that, our interactions became more professional. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't expect to be, but I knew my work was good enough. It wasn't easy dealing with a manager like Jane, but over time, I learned how to handle her perfectionism. I learned to set boundaries and not internalize her demands. The job became more manageable when I stopped second-guessing myself and started trusting my abilities. In the end, working with Jane taught me an important lesson. Sometimes people can be difficult, but it's not always about you. Setting clear boundaries and speaking up when you need to can make all the difference. I had just started my new job at a tech company and was still getting to know the team. It wasn't a huge office, just a few departments working together in a laid-back environment. But there was one coworker, Jessica, who quickly made me feel uncomfortable. At first, it wasn't anything too obvious. Jessica was always polite and would often greet me with a warm smile. "Hey, how's your morning going?" or "Want to grab lunch later?" were the kind of questions she would ask, and I would politely respond. It seemed normal at first, but after a few days, things started to feel a little off. Jessica would come over to my desk, not just for work-related things, but for random chit-chat. She'd stand too close, leaning in a bit too much for comfort. I'd back away slightly, trying to keep some personal space, but she didn't seem to notice. Every time she came over, I'd feel an almost physical pressure to engage in conversation, even if I was busy or just didn't feel like talking. One afternoon, I was in the middle of a project when Jessica came over with her usual wide grin. "Hey, what are you working on?" she asked, leaning down to look at my screen. I could feel her breath on my neck as she leaned in a bit too close. Just some coding," I replied, trying to keep my distance without making it obvious. Instead of stepping back, she plopped herself down on the edge of my desk. "Mind if I sit here for a bit?" she asked. I was taken aback. It wasn't that I didn't like her, but something about the way she kept inserting herself into my space made me uneasy. I hadn't even been at this job long enough to feel comfortable with anyone in the office yet. But I didn't want to seem rude, so I let her stay. However, she didn't just sit there for a few minutes and then leave like a normal person would. No, Jessica stayed for nearly an hour. She talked about everything from her weekend plans to her thoughts on the latest season of a TV show we both liked. She asked about my personal life, about my family, my friends, and even started giving me unsolicited advice about how to deal with stress. It was a lot. When she finally got up to leave, I felt like I could breathe again. But it wasn't the last time. Over the next few days, Jessica continued to hover around me. She'd join me during lunch breaks, stand next to me while I worked, and even asked to sit in on meetings I was having with other colleagues. One day, I was in a meeting with my manager and some of the other team members when Jessica barged in without knocking. "Sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to ask if anyone's seen my pen," she asked loudly in the middle of the conversation. I looked at my manager, who seemed to hold back an annoyed sigh. "Jessica, this is a meeting. You can't just walk in here like that." Jessica didn't seem fazed. She smiled and looked at me. "Sorry about that. Anyway, see you later." And then, without waiting for any response, she walked out. That was the moment I decided something needed to change. I didn't know how to handle Jessica without coming off as rude or standoffish, but I couldn't keep letting her invade my space like this. I took a deep breath and decided to talk to her directly the next time she approached me. I waited for the following day when she came to my desk, leaned in far too close, and started talking about a new coffee shop in the area. "Hey, Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I really like chatting with you, but I'd prefer if we kept a little more distance when we talk. I tend to focus better when I'm not distracted." To my surprise, Jessica looked a little taken aback. She nodded and stepped back slightly. "Oh, I didn't realize I was making you uncomfortable," she said. "I'll try to give you more space." And she did. After that, Jessica started to respect my personal space a lot more. She still chatted with me, but she no longer hovered or stood too close. Things got a lot easier once I set those boundaries. Looking back, I realize how important it is to communicate your comfort level with people at work. While Jessica's intentions weren't malicious, her behavior was crossing a line, and it took me standing up for myself to make her understand that. Sometimes setting clear boundaries is the best way to maintain a professional, respectful relationship at work. When I first joined the marketing department at my new job, I was excited to meet my colleagues and get started on some interesting projects. The team seemed friendly enough, and everyone appeared to be really passionate about their work. But there was one person who stood out for all the wrong reasons: Catherine, the office overachiever. At first, it seemed like Catherine was just incredibly dedicated to her work. She always stayed late, always volunteered for extra projects, and always came in early to brainstorm new ideas. She was the definition of a go-getter, and everyone admired her for it. But over time, her behavior started to cross into uncomfortable territory. It started with the little things. Catherine would always show up at my desk to check in on the progress of my tasks. At first, I thought it was just a manager-like behavior, keeping track of the work being done. But as the days went by, I realized it was becoming more frequent and less professional. She would often interrupt me during my work, asking how I was doing, offering unsolicited suggestions, and giving me her opinion on everything I was doing. One day, I was in the middle of drafting a marketing campaign, and Catherine came over to my desk yet again. "Hey, I was thinking maybe you should add a bit more flair to that headline." she said, leaning over my shoulder to point at my screen. I stepped back instinctively, feeling invaded. I gave her a polite smile and nodded. Thanks, I think it's almost done, though. But Catherine wasn't done. No, she insisted. I really think you could make it pop more. Why don't you try this? She grabbed my mouse and started clicking around my screen, changing things without asking. I really prefer to do it myself, I said, feeling the tension rise in my chest. She didn't seem to register my discomfort. I just want the best for you, Catherine said, flashing me a bright smile. You'll thank me later. The next day, she barged into my office, holding a folder full of new ideas she wanted me to implement. These are some suggestions for your project. I've already done half the work for you. Thought I'd help out since you've been a little behind, she said, handing me the folder like it was a gift. I stood there, unsure of how to respond. I had been working on the project diligently, and it was frustrating to have someone come in and imply that I wasn't doing enough. I took the folder from her and forced a smile. Thanks, but I've got it covered. I've been making progress. She didn't seem to hear me. She said, I just want to make sure this project gets done right. We don't want anyone to think we can't handle it. Her tone was so condescending that it made me want to shout, but I kept my cool. Things only got worse from there. Catherine began to take credit for things she had no involvement in. During meetings, she would interject constantly, offering her input as if she were the lead on every project. She would reframe ideas to make them sound like they were her own, and if anyone disagreed with her, she'd dismiss their opinions as not big picture enough. One day, I had enough. We were in a team meeting, and Catherine was again taking over the discussion, pushing her ideas on everyone. When she tried to claim credit for the work I'd been doing for weeks, I finally spoke up. Catherine, I said firmly, I've been working on that project for the last month. I've got everything under control. I appreciate your input, but I'd like to handle it from here. Catherine blinked, surprised by my directness. Oh, sorry, I just thought I was helping, she said, her voice faltering for a moment. But I could tell she didn't really understand. After that, I started setting clearer boundaries. I would politely but firmly tell her that I didn't need any more help unless I asked for it. I began to take credit for my own work and wasn't afraid to push back when she overstepped. It was uncomfortable at first, but eventually Catherine started to back off. Looking back, I realize how important it is to assert yourself, even when someone's intentions seem good. Catherine genuinely thought she was helping, but her behavior was more about her own need for control than actually being a supportive teammate. It wasn't easy standing up to her, but in the end, it was the best thing for both of us.